America's only hope is God in heaven.
Yep.
Even with the best laid plans, even with the best guys, if you're not dialing in a God component to the victory here, it's no victory at all.
Welcome to Flyover Conservative Podcast with David and Stacy Whited, where we break down current events and examine culture through the lens of conservative Christian values. Hello and welcome. I am really looking forward to today's podcast. How about yourself?
I am excited. I'm excited for a few days. We've been exchanging texts back and forth and talking about world events and things going on. And I'm excited for our special guest that we're having on today. We're David and Stacy Whited at Flyover Conservatives. And we examine, like we said in the intro, current events and cultural issues through the lens of conservative Christian values. So whether it's breaking down a music video by a Tom McDonald, or in this last week, we had the directors of the Trump I Know documentary. So you get to see the behind the scenes of people who actually worked with President Trump.
Which
and
truly, that was my favorite documentary, I think, from the whole thing with Trump. And I loved Dinesh D'Souza. I loved his.
Those are phenomenal. Trump cards, great. But the Trump I Know was
really
amazing.
Special.
And getting to see the people who envisioned that and put that together is incredible. So we kind of cover the spectrum. We talked about the grid this last week, and this upcoming week, we have a special agent that's been shot in the line of duty. He's worked on the border, been a part of ICE, and he can tell you firsthand exactly what's happening in that world. So we cover a lot of ground, and nothing is as interesting as the guest that we have today. Again, I use the term insider baseball when we have this guest on, because it's the best view of somebody that has an understanding of the corporate world, overseas business, media. He's an author, he's a speaker, an entrepreneur on the highest level. And honestly, after spending quite a bit of time with him in person, one of the most generous human beings I've ever been around. And everyone I personally know that's had interaction with him has come out ahead in the equation. And he paid for my dinner. So I think that's pretty special as well.
Sure.
So no further.
Make sure you're sharing this out so others can hear it. Make sure you're hitting the notification bell. Make sure you're subscribing. And this will be a message that you want to definitely get out today.
So with no further ado, Mr. Juan Savin.
Welcome, Juan.
What's up, cowboy?
Well, I'm after an introduction like that, I don't know if I can live up to my own pre-interview.
There's nowhere to go but down from here.
Oh my gosh.
We've always enjoyed our time with you. We always learn something. Our listeners learn so much. For those of you listening, though, comment, do leave your interactions below. We've interacted with literally thousands of replies, in these, and Juan has as well. He'll even screenshot some of them, send them to us. So he's heavily engaged in this process. We feel like we're all in this boat together at the same time. We're all kind of experiencing the same things. And but sometimes we're looking out of a different window. If you've ever been on an airplane, you got an aisle seat, maybe somebody else has a window seat. Well, Juan's got a really good seat to see a lot of things. And right now, I think he's in a seat looking out a window in Washington, D.C.
So he's right there in the center.
It's the heart of darkness right here. Fortunately, they've got the swamp caged off with a security zone, a protective zone, the concertina wire, etc. Nothing's getting in or out without going through security there over at the White House. And it's not just a little security zone. It's like a mile around.
Man, and I'm so glad you're there, because, we're hearing from people, that's been taken down a long time ago. So it's good to have somebody that's actually there that can actually tell us what is going on.
I love that viral video by that senator, I forget her name, is Bober from Colorado.
Bober, yes.
Yeah, she got that one kind of like Kim Classic, but she's walking through DC and she's walking by the wall though, and she's like, what you call it, Fort Pelosi, and she's like, she's like, Mrs. Pelosi, take down this wall, kind of a Reagan-esque. It's a great video, and it needs to be seen.
That's true, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you got to wonder, if Congress has to have a security fence protected from the people, it's supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And there's a certain symbology. If this is supposed to be government for the people, and the whole idea is that you can look at it one of two ways. Either they're fenced it off to protect themselves from the rest of the country, or they fenced it off. And they're sending you symbology, what they want to do for the rest of the country. They want to fence us off from everything productive out into the future, somehow. So you got to wonder what's really going on there. Certainly this hasn't existed that I recall any time in my lifetime, and we've had some pretty serious moments. And they did take down the larger security perimeter that was all through this DC area that was set up prior to the inauguration. And so back in mid-January, they put this amazing blocks and pillars and fencing and everything else in there. And that has been removed and not put back in place. But the smaller stuff around the White House and Congress is still there.
Interesting. How about military? Do you see them there as well?
They're not readily visible, but they are definitely here. For example, the signs are still out in front of the restaurant, 25% discount to National Guard.
Wow, that's good.
And then I don't want to say the location, but one of the locations that I have people that I've been putting up here in town over the last few days for some interviews and other work that I had to do. Not here to protest or do anything else, by the way. I'm saying that specifically to the FBI agents that I spoke with the other day. I haven't paid for anybody to come to town to do anything in the way of protests ever. And so that was one of the specific questions. And of course, that there was some folks that I flew out to Nevada for our meeting, but I did not pay for anybody to come into DC or protest or be part of any meetings out here prior to, during, or after the 6th. And other than a couple of business meetings that I've had in town in just the last few days, that's the only exception. So completely unrelated to any protests in Washington, DC. But that's, the FBI is out actively looking for anybody that they can pin with having had some role in financing the protesters. Well, the only question I'd have is, okay, let's flip it over the other way. How many of these protesters in all the cities across the country, going back over the last year, had financing, and who did that come from?
You have to look at those credit card records.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's go back and relook at that. If you're going to ask one way, why don't we ask the other way? Who is financing these protesters? That's not over. Anybody that thinks that card has all been played, it's done, it's the last hand, it's not relevant. We're not done.
That's interesting that you bring it up, because the question we get from a lot of people is, there are people that definitely feel disheartened. They were like, okay, November 3rd, everything's gonna be okay. Okay, no, January 6th, everything's gonna be okay. Okay, January 20th, everything's gonna be okay. Okay, maybe March the 4th. Obviously these dates have passed. What is your thought? Like, what's going on right now? What do you think?
One cowboy I follow has been saying April 1st for a long time.
That is true. That is true.
Well, okay, so let's do this for everybody that's out there. I have said it numerous times. For about a year and a half, the bets that I had with friends over this election, I'd get them all wound up mentally that I hedged my bets, saying that by April 1st, anybody that voted for Trump would be the smart ones, because Trump would be recognized as president. Mm-hmm. Even if you had whatever the candidate before Biden was even the nominee, whoever the Democrat was, I said that they would be the fool for backing whoever the Democratic nominee was. And then when Biden became the nominee, Biden. And so I did quite a few bets amongst friends, dinner. One of them related to a whole time equation, wanted to bet a very valuable watch. And so we had some fun with that. And I mean, we're buddies, and nobody was betting the farm. Okay, we had some meaningful bets, but they weren't. Nobody was going to die.
Gentlemen's bets with gentlemen that have nice things.
Yes.
Yeah, having some fun and putting some skin in the game. backing our positions, of, meaningful between us as friends. No friendship on the line over win or lose or whatever. And so certainly guys doing what guys do. Okay, sorry, it's just the way it is. And so with that in mind, I cook their brains because April 1st, what's that all about? No, this is about the 20th of January. Like, no, do April 1st. And so I haven't changed that bet at all. And I'll live or die, sink or swim on the April 1st date. But like I had one of my guys that called out of New York here, I don't know, 2-3 days ago. And he was all, you still thinking you're going to win that bet? And I says, yep. And he says, but the March 4th thing didn't happen. And I says, well, it wasn't March 4th. It was March 4 to 6. And that was never the bet. I said I would be out here because certainly they had upped the prices. There was some kind of indication the money was spent for this company to have the facilities out there and deployed, and that was prepaid for. But I never said that I believed that was the drop dead date. I was certainly going to be here to be present because it's an interesting thing, but that's not the bet. I said, our bet's April 1st. And even what was written, I said that President Trump would be recognized as the president. But I said, and even in the recent times, there's room for dual presidency, just like Jefferson Davis and Lincoln. People forget that there was a dual presidency coming into the Civil War because of the way the vote was held. And that dispute wasn't resolved instantly. So you had a Jefferson Davis, Lincoln dual presidency. In many people's minds, even right now, there's this perception that some kind of dual presidency exists even now. Well, you could go back into the past and say that even during all of Trump's presidency, you really had a ghosting dual presidency because Obama was doing things behind the scenes and coordinating things behind the scenes that amounted to him operating in something approaching a presidential role, with him and his cohorts trying to affect politics in America as a former president acting as controlling things like president somehow. It's kind of a stretch. I'm not going to go too far on that, but I mean, I recognize what they're saying. Moving forward right now, President Trump stepped down according to the law and stepped away from the office of the president on January 20th. And yet there is a component here where, and we've talked about it in your show numerous times, I don't have to belabor the point, I've talked about it on numerous shows, the military didn't have a legal entry point or obligation to act until Congress had failed to protect the Constitution and the Republic by intervening on this false, fraudulent Pearl Harbor attack, digital attack on the American people through this falsified digital vote. They didn't act prior to the inauguration event for Joe Biden on the 20th of January. The courts failed to act prior to that swearing in moment, and then have doubled down, tripled down on their position since, with failing to take action with a third attempt by the states to get some kind of hearing, and other persons, Powell and others, with their legal actions over the last several days. So at the end of the day, both Congress and the courts have not seen fit to do anything to push back on, overturn this digital fraud on America. So with that in mind, the military does have very specific legal obligations and jurisdiction before turning over the keys if they have knowledge of a crime, knowledge of a Manchurian candidate. If in fact there is information evidence establishing that a Manchurian candidate, somebody who is a proxy of foreign governments or treasonous persons, traitorous persons, who has been installed to become commander in chief. The military has certain obligations that are triggered at an inauguration moment that begins a certain process to withhold turning over certain authorities and controls. They may do some blended thing while they're working through the mechanics of this and details. And why would they be slow? Because an action that's wrong would be itself considered treasonous, traitorous,
Right.
Even bearing guilt to the point of being a hanging offense, essentially. So
I think that's really good terminology and phrasing to do it. I want to just reference something you said there about, signs of things. You came there for the March 4th through 6th window. We live in Kansas City. We've seen our share of tornadoes on Kansas and Missouri both. It's a little bit like Jesus said. He says, be aware of the signs in the sky, be aware of the weather. Like, before it's raining, the clouds are coming in. You can smell the rain long before you feel water. You can see the clouds shifting. You can see it getting darker. There's signs of things going on. And it is foolish to see signs and not look outside and think, hey, is this going to be rain? Is this going to be a tornado? What's the wind shift? And we know the signs. We live here and what it looks like when there's going to be tornado weather before there's sirens. We don't need the sirens to tell us the tornadoes coming.
Or when there is sirens, which is really interesting because about a week and a half ago, sirens were going off for tornado warning. We went outside and we're like, this is not tornado weather. And it was just actually a test. And we're like, we knew it because we know the signs. We're like, that's not tornado weather.
Now somebody visiting here from California might be like, ready to hit the basement and messing their pants. They'd be like, there's tornado sirens. But because of our experience and our context, we were able to go outside and say, it is windy. This is not tornado weather. There's not going to be a tornado, promise you. But for you to see the signs, step forward and look in and examine them is just wisdom. That doesn't mean any more or less than that. It's stepping in and saying, okay, what are the signs? Why were the hotel rates going up for March 4th through 6th? Why was there money allotted for an inauguration-like event? Why was this? Why was there that? So you're stepping in and you're gathering these things. And then you put that next to all your other information and you're weighing it out and you're judging and testing the times based on the signs.
Well, it was funny. It was my friend that called over from New York. Even when he was asking me about this, he turns around and answers his own question. He says, well, on the numbers, the next date that I'm worried about is 3/11. And of course, he's understood there's a numbers component to this combat that we're in right now. And we're using these dates against them. And so he's going, well, it's 3/11. And then if there's 10 days of darkness, and if there's some kind of a emergency broadcast system and everything else, they're testing all this stuff. And then 10 days later would be 3/21. That could be the other date. But then there's 10 days after that, and that's 3/31. And the 31 is a reverse 13, and it's a 33, and it's the dual numbers. And there's all sorts and he's going on. I'm going, well, I guess obviously he's listened to a few of the presentations I've done. So give him it. And he's got the paper out and he's marking all down. Look, there's options that are dialed in from both sides. And at the end, it'll look like it was known from the beginning what it probably was going to be. But this is war. This is a battle. You're in a season. For example, when the landing took place June 6th of 1944 or 43, going into Europe at Normandy, the point was you had to, you had to do it within a certain tidal season. That's these high tides that were occurring that would get these landing craft up past all of the fortifications, these blockages, these metal beams that were out there in the water. would help them to land further up this long beach. And there's only certain places you could do a landing in Europe and it would work for these large numbers. And so the Germans knew that any attempt to have an invading army into Europe would have to come at certain places. So they put these huge gun emplacements in the shoreline, these batteries to keep warships further off the coast.
Right.
They knew that in their mind, Patton had an army that had been assembled there, and all these tanks and equipment that were assembled there for an invasion of Europe. There was all sorts of back and forth trolling between the sides to convince Hitler that the landing had to happen at Calais and that was what the plan was. And so great ruses were put in play by both sides to fool each other about what was possible, what wasn't possible, where it would be, how it would come. But they both knew that there was a very tight window to do the assault, to have the army moving across Europe during the summer months when you didn't have muck and goo to go through with tanks, when you didn't have these wet areas where the combat favored a moving army, not a dug-in army. And so they knew that the battle parameters were somewhat set. There may have been some options where the point of engagement would be, how the beachhead would be built out, but they both knew it was coming. And in reality, at this moment in time here in America, the whole world is watching this moment because they know it's not over and it's still coming. I had a aide to a very wealthy person, probably top couple hundred in the world, that we had a meal the other day, spent several hours together. He flew in from a place where there was some very almost a Cuba-like moment that just happened the other day, and they barely got out. You have one of the wealthiest people in the world, and it was like a scene from The Godfather with people beating on the cab and security forces working to get him out and holding a plane on the ground, commercial aircraft on the ground for an hour and a half while they were trying to get these people to the plane to get on it and get them out of the country. And, they were quite thankful to have gotten out in one piece. It was a very dire moment. This just happened days ago. And he gets off, he came in town because he knew I was in town and wanted to meet, discuss some things. And so very first words out of his mouth. And you have to understand, this is somebody that's as connected as anybody on the planet to governments all over the world, industry, business, political, everything, military, a very connected person. And the first thing out of his mouth, and he had to fly here and wanted to do the meeting, "What the hell is going on?"
There's a lot of conversations starting that way.
Definitely. No doubt about it.
Everybody's always wondering that same question. I think about the Israelites leaving Egypt. God already had a plan. I would imagine after each plague, first of all, not even all the Israelites were on board with wanting to leave Egypt.
Right.
They weren't aware of all the things that were going on. I would imagine after the second one, they're like, okay, well, it's going to work. Oh, that didn't work out. I guess now we're in trouble. Well, then there's a third one.
Yeah.
Well, then that didn't work out. I guess, their emotional roller coaster was
they were
probably
even emotional roller coasters once they got out of it.
Yeah,
they get to the Red Sea,
They crossed the Red Sea. They were still emotional roller coaster. And the conversation with your friend that came in from overseas, I think a lot of conversations start that way today. What in the world is going on? Because even when you're the closest one in the loop, the closest ones to Moses, we're always asking,
what is going on?
I mean, you can't get closer, than Aaron. You can't get closer than some of these people are like, what is going on? What is happening? And there's always this thing of looking to your left and your right. What's going on? And does God have a plan? In the midst of this.
Okay. Let me. I sent you over an interview I did the other day, and I shared, but some of your listeners might not have heard what I was saying over there, Jen and Prim. And I say Prim, he goes by Prime, but I had to explain to him that he was a victim of a public school education. It's actually pronounced Prim. So he had to relearn how to say his own name anyway. But let me tell you the story, because in case people haven't heard it, and the audio was poor over there in that interview, and I apologize for him. But anyway, let's go back to Babylon the Great. And a lot of the narrative in the Bible is based around what happened with King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel himself, who, Daniel, this great prophet, he was born in Israel, but Israel had fallen into this deep sin. Here they are, this nation that God had brought out of slavery and brought into the land. But why did he bring him into this particular place? It was Canaan land. It was the land of the descendants of Cain.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Canaan land was inhabited by what? Giants.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they didn't go in. They were afraid of the giants when they
Yep.
were told to go in, and they sent in spies to go look at the land. God didn't want them to send in spies. He just said, go take it. And they didn't trust God. They didn't trust what was going on. So no. Let's send some spies in and see if we can do this and figure it out. That makes a lot of sense. So they send these spies in. Only 2 of the spies came back with a good report. Yeah, they all said, every one of them went in and saw it's the land of milk and honey. It's great. And the grapes are the size of pomegranates. And, it's just this incredible place. But we were but grasshoppers in their sight.
Yep.
And these giants. And so they were afraid to go in because they didn't trust that God, the God that brought them out of slavery, brought them out of Egypt, was capable of helping them to take the land, to win against these monsters, these giants. And remember, what did that denote? Giants. They were humanoid, not human.
Correct.
Yep.
They were descendants of Cain, and that in itself refers to the fact that Cain was a hybrid. He was part human and part alien, if you will. Alien to the human race, because this whole thing with Eve and Samael, Satan, the devil, where Cain and Abel were born twins, same mother, 2 different fathers. Eve, after having been beguiled by Satan, Lucifer, the devil, whoever, goes by 1,000 names, became impregnated, and then went and taught Adam the trick, and again gets pregnant, 2 different fathers, same birth cycle, and they're born as twins. So
And that's where, like, I love the Enoch interpretation and the Genesis interpretation. They such compelling stories. Anybody that thinks that Bible history is boring has actually read it. Mm-hmm. But there was so much weirdness with mankind and everything around Genesis 6 that we have a hard time even imagining what these creatures would have looked like in Canaan that the spies came back and reported on. Well,
and the main thing in this whole narrative here, look, a lot of people, I don't see that in the Bible. That's somebody else doing all sorts of conjecture, whatever. Hey, calm down. Listen, take a deep breath. It doesn't matter what you believe or what you see in the scriptures. Take a deep breath. What I'm telling you about is what these people that we're in combat with right now and engaged against, who control the power centers of the earth, the corporate centers of the earth, the religious centers of the earth, believe.
Yep.
Belief is the driver of action. They do things based on their belief. Their religion believes a certain set of things, and so they're acting based on that.
Right.
And we're in a battle based on what their beliefs are and how they think, and having to respond to that, to take action based on that. And so they have certain things that drive how they function, how they work, how they interact, how they think, how they're engaging us. Canaan land was a place where they had certain beliefs, among them that if they sacrifice children, human children, that they would gain favor with their god, Baal, Satan, Lucifer, the devil, Moloch, goes by 1,000 different names.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the final straw with God, and had to be encountered, destroyed. And so these small, puny Israelites who weren't trained as an army, who couldn't even hardly come together as a nation, because every time you try to do something, they got 15 different ideas about what is the right way to engage or do something that they're told to do from God. And they're fighting Moses all the way, they're fighting God all the way, and they're not doing what they're told to do. And yet God brought them together to go in and take the Canaan land, and that's the promised land. That's where Abraham walked, and God promised it to him generations earlier, half a millennia earlier, and yet they're there to take that land. That's why Satan had the Canaanites move there and occupy the land, was a blocking maneuver against what God was going to do far into the future, because Satan himself knew what God had promised Abraham and moved those people in there to provide a blocking maneuver against God's people coming and occupying the land that God had promised them. You're seeing things happening at a spiritual level, at a galactic level, at some divine level. This war in heaven type of an encounter, where the point of engagement is right here on earth. That's why Satan went in and tried to corrupt the good seed that God had planted here in the earth with Adam and Eve. You know, there was humanoids here before Adam and Eve were planted there at Olduvai in the garden. And by the way, we know right where the Garden of Eden was located. It's an amazing cradle spot. It's fantastic. It's an amazing story. Someday I'll have a conversation with people about that and the build out from that location. But and I'll probably do that over at my website at 107daily.com. Once I begin posting there and doing presentations there.
We're
shortly.
excited about that. Hey, Juan, can I ask you a question in this
Yeah.
moment right here? You're talking about in history, and I love that stuff. I'm fascinated on it. I believe, you know, for some of you listening, this is probably like new information. Like, wow, I'd never heard of this in Sunday school. I remember even Jimmy Swaggart did a whole series and wrote a book about pre-Adamic creation. And there's just certain things that are like you just can't hardly explain, and you're digging into these. But these forces that they're coming across in that land, you know, it's always baffled me. How did the children of Israel keep going back and they would participate in these same kind of sacrificial ceremonies? And like there must have been demonstrative power that they saw visibly from these demonic gods, from these Luciferian lines that are still in power today. So sometimes we think these are just people and we're dealing against, you know, corrupt people with bad intents. These are powerful demonic entities in these Luciferian lines that these people that are operating the world today, that go all the way back to this time period that you're talking about right here, that were so powerful that when torn between the two over and over, the children of Israel were always going back, and they would do the same kind of demonic child sacrifices to these other gods. And it's because there is a power there. It's a dark, evil power, but there was something that obviously was so big. It wasn't just the size of the people, that those 10 spies that came back were like, hey, we don't want any part of this. They're too big. They're too powerful.
And what's interesting about that is they then were not able to enter the promised land because of that.
Yep.
Only Joshua and Caleb could actually enter the promised land because they believed that they could take it, versus the others who actually died in the wilderness.
And we're still dealing with that 10 and the 2. And I think everybody that's on this call today, you need to be thinking about, are you part of the 10? Or are you part of the 2? And at what point, you know, do you make that decision of which team that you want to be on? And man, you always want history to reflect back on who was on God's side the whole point, no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's even why I was going to say what I was going to say up to Babylon. And so let me finish that story. You know, again, this history of the nation of Israel, they come together. They had a tent of meeting where the Ark of the Covenant was in the Holy of Holies. It was in a tent that traveled with them out in the Sinai Desert. And then when they came into the land, you had this temple that was built, and the glory of God came into the temple, and seat of God, throne of God's there, and there's all the golden instruments and everything that were for the sacrifice stuff, which was, by the way, people get all wound up in the sacrifice stuff. It was symbolic. It was reflective of the fact that there was a need for a blood sacrifice, because God said the penalty of sin is death. And so the sin that came into the world in the garden, there was this, coming against God, going against God's will. The penalty of sin is death. Then God takes on human flesh at some later point, like we put on a coat. Christ himself said, he who has seen me has seen the Father. Not that he was someone other than God himself, but it was literally the Spirit of God taking on human flesh, and then stepping into the gap, into this place, not just symbolically, but in reality, somehow, to take on the penalty of sin. No man could do it for us, because every man is born in sin. But God, by his own Spirit, taking on human flesh as a man, then being without sin, being a perfect sacrifice. So all the sacrifices done earlier were in some faith that God would provide a true sacrifice at some future point that would be able to take the penalty of sin on that sacrifice and restore the relationship between God and man. That this penalty of sin, being death, would be somehow canceled out, paid for, not ignored, but actually fulfilled, for those that would accept that. And so the promise to Adam and Eve, after they were kicked out of the garden, and Adam went through great emotional gyrations, trauma, because of this separation from God, and this change that happened to him physically, with being kicked out of the garden. And all of those, his children, his sons, generations down, and grandsons, with the trauma of being out in the world and separated from God, and this promise by God that a way would be made for restoration, and it would come through Eve's descendants, that she would be saved, that they would be saved through childbirth, that there would be a child that would come at some future date, and through that child, a mechanism for reconciliation with God would be made, and they would be restored to their relationship with God. So, but that being somewhere out in the future, and actually in some of the writings, the specific term 5,500 years is used to Adam in some of the early Greek or Egyptian writings like that, when they were there as slaves in Israel or in Egypt. There's a lot of stuff I've talked about in other programs, and somewhere I'll do a more precise broadcast and go into all of that at a future date, but we don't have time here today. But my point is that there's this great mystery. At the end of the day, we're still fighting that same fight that goes all the way back to the garden, all the way back to Cain and Abel. Cain slaying Abel, from a satanic perspective, with Satan breathing in his ear. If you destroy Abel, then you're the sole heir of the inheritance. If Adam dies, because Cain was headed for Adam next after he slew Abel. Had he killed Adam, there would have been no way that God's promise to Adam, that he was giving Adam and his descendants the earth for an inheritance, there was no way that could be fulfilled if Adam had died and Abel had died. There were no other direct descendants of Adam. So God would have had to do a hybrid, blended thing, where the children, since Eve was taken out of Adam's side and was fully human flesh, human period, human being a descendant of Adam, that the only way for God to be God, where he says something and it comes to pass, is that Eve's descendants, her being Adam in origin herself, would be it. But the only way that could happen would be if Cain, her son, had sex with her, the mother, and then had children, and those children would all be hybrid of Satan, Lucifer, the devil, Samael. And they would be commingled seed with Satan. So Satan would have to be blessed. Satan and his descendants, his seed, would have to be blessed out through eternity in order for God to fulfill his promise to Adam that it was his seed that would inherit the earth. God caught in the catch-22. Satan never said he wanted to be greater than God. He only said he wanted to be as God, because there could be nothing greater than God. There's no creation, there's nothing that exists that's greater than God.
There is no above God. Like
exactly.
Robin Bullock says, God looks up and sees nothing.
Exactly.
Yes. So with that in mind, then you come through all of this history. We're in some divine combat. And when Israel was sinning against God, they were allowing the child sacrifices to occur on the hills around Jerusalem and throughout the land, and child sacrifice to Baal and Moloch, making their children to pass through the flame. A very polite way of saying they were roasting their children alive as sacrifices to Baal. Why? Because Baal, Satan, didn't want human children. Going back to Abel, he only wanted hybrids because that's the only way he survived. So
it's defilement.
And it's defilement. And then from a satanic perspective, if you can get the people to do evil, then Satan doesn't have to do a thing. Satan is powerless. He's a worm. He's made to crawl in the dust of the earth. His power is the power of persuasion. It's the power of the magician. He doesn't have arms and legs, except that we become his arms and legs to do his will. So he has to connive, he has to fool, he has to get people to do his bidding. And so if he fools the people to do evil, God himself must judge the people, must take action against a lawless, an evil, corrupt people. So if he can get the people to do sacrifices of their children and to worship him in various ways, then God destroys his people, takes them into captivity. So it was said that God ordained that Babylon, that Nebuchadnezzar was able to come conquer the land of Israel and take them into captivity. Why? Because they weren't acting as a godly people. And his judgment was required. So Satan's having a laugh because he's tricked God's people into doing the very thing that would force God himself to take action against the nation. And those people that were conquered and taken into captivity in Babylon, some of the things that happened first when in that era, when people were taken captive, the men, for the most part, were just killed. The young boys,
those are the warriors, the army, the warriors, anybody that could be a threat.
That's right. The young boys were castrated so they couldn't reproduce. Horrible thing, young preteen boy, and then this horrible thing. They were made eunuchs. So one of the features of people castrated in that way is that then they have high voices the rest of their life. They don't grow mature sexually, and it's just a traumatic thing. So you had these eunuchs. Then the young girls, they were made, essentially sex slaves, concubines. If they became impregnant, they had hybrids themselves. And now the way they find favor into the kingdom is, of course, they do become impregnated and they raise children that are, blended between whoever the conquerors are and their own history. When the situation happened over in Kosovo, one of the things that happened, the supposed Christians uh, were doing this horrible deeds of raping all the Muslim girls, very young and old, so that the men, because of their religion, wouldn't then have relations with them ever again, because that would be unclean. And so by raping them, they were essentially taking them out of the gene pool, and they wouldn't stop. They'd put them in the churches and rape them until they were visibly pregnant, even the young girls, very young, so that they could not be done. Sex as a weapon. That's one of the first presentations I actually intend to do over at 107 Daily. So
anybody that says, that we take sex so casually as a culture in our music and the language and the way things are treated. And, there's a component to sex that is
unlike anything else.
It's not shaking hands with somebody, there's a difference between somebody beating somebody up and somebody raping somebody. That sexual component, that is a dark side of history. I think everybody hears this story and you recognize that, but I think it's important as a culture that we begin to take that very seriously. There's reasons why there's restrictions around that.
Yes.
If you're going to say that sex is a weapon, all the way back to the first engagement between God and Satan at this hinge point here on the planet, being sex used as a weapon to bring sin into the world. You don't have to agree with me on that. I'm just telling you what they believe. The people that were opposed to this cult that's running America, that's running the world in many ways, and this satanic cult, sex is their weapon of choice. And you think it's missiles and arms or anything else. No, it's the corruption, the pollution of the human DNA. Look at Noah. People misread that scripture. They don't read it fully. Why was it that God had the flood, and what was it that made Noah unique to where God chose to save Noah? Well, it's the whole Genesis up to that point in time tells you the whole story. It gives you bloodline, lineage, who begot who begot who begot who. People get, it's so boring. I go, care less, who begot who. This is so, well, then you're missing the whole point of the narrative. Okay. It's showing the bloodline relation back to Adam through Seth, as opposed to the bloodlines of Cain. That's this war that we're in right now that goes right back to the very beginning in Genesis. It's Genesis through Revolutions. And by the way, for those people that got all wound up because I don't know the difference between revelation and revolution, I must not know my Bible. All right.
Listen close. One thing I know about you, you don't do a lot by accident.
No, you're not misspeaking here.
Give me a break. I'm trying to.
There's a lot. I heard Joseph Prince talk about, that Noah was saved because he was probably his family was the last ones that were genetically pure from what God had created.
Well, it says, the scripture says precisely, and Noah alone was perfect without sin. Oh, okay. All right. Whoa. Please, people, sometimes you have to finish reading. Don't race off and respond. Sometimes people will make want to comment or something on something that I'm saying in a show, and they're racing to make the comment. They haven't even heard the rest of the show yet.
Right. It's true. Okay. That is so true.
And so read the rest of the scripture. Noah alone was perfect in all of his generations. Perfect without sin in all of his generations. Well, what was the original sin? Eve was beguiled, had relationship with Satan, Lucifer, the devil, this alien entity, and became pregnant with a hybrid. You go
That
all
is
through the
all new to me.
scriptures.
I haven't heard that before. As far as that is concerned, I'd like to really study that and look into that. Is it something you've heard before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well, and remember what you go even to what Christ talks about in the parables. An enemy came in and sowed an evil seed in the night. And when the laborers saw that there was good seed and bad seed in the same field, they says, let us go out there and pull up these weeds, so that they don't, they don't get away with this. And God, the landowner, says, no, let the evil weeds and the good seed grow up together, lest any of the good seed be destroyed while you're pulling up the evil seed. Can you imagine, how are you going to have an abortion of Cain when Eve is pregnant? And by the way, Eve wasn't raped. She was beguiled. She bought into, she was fooled, and she was a participant. She didn't have an abortion. The good seed and the bad seed of Cain and Abel were twins, as many allege. Certainly in their legends, that's the way it's portrayed. And many of the rabbis see it exactly this way. And I grant instantly that the Bible is shaded in an understanding of what that is. Other writings appear to clarify it more, but it's open to discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But the people that we are engaged with right now see it a certain way, so they believe things occurred a certain way, and belief is the driver of action. So
neither here nor there. There's, no matter what text you're coming from, canonized or not, there was fallen angels that were intermingling with human race, not in one instance, but ongoing for a period of time, which led to Noah possibly being in his family the last that were of the pure blood that came from Adam, and that bloodline's traced from Adam all the way to Jesus, and it's significant that it's so.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point of the Cain narrative that I was going through. I think the Bible's very clear that there was a hybridization that occurred, and people want to get into all the aliens and everything else. And I've talked about this before previously. They're talking about the reptilian race. What is the reptilian race of aliens? What is it? Hello, really? Is it that difficult for you to grasp this? The serpent. What's a serpent? It's a reptile. What are the children of Cain? If you say that Satan, Samael, the devil, was the father of Cain, then they would be the serpent seed, okay, hidden in plain sight. The royal families believe they're descendants of Cain. They're the serpents. That's the serpent race. We're in a battle right now over the serpent race versus the Adamic race and this blended hybrid race. And by the way, for those that are worried, well, I might have Cain blood in me, I might have, it's almost certain that most people do. But that's the other thing in the scriptures from Christ, from the New Testament, that the blood of Christ is able to cleanse from all sin. So if you say that the original sin, the beginning point of all of this, was some relationship of Eve with the devil, and it resulted in a Canaanite race, this serpent seed. Well, the New Testament is that all of that can be negated, canceled, cleansed. That commingled DNA can be cleansed by the blood of Christ against all sin. So, there's heavenly mysteries. They abound. Take a deep breath. Understand that, some of this we take by faith. There is a very divine component here in what has to be done. It's done by faith. But all that said, I don't want to lose people in one thing that I started here. So let me finish my narrative here on this situation up in Babylon. You have this contest. You have the people that are sinning against God. God's hand is forced to take action against the rebellious, godless people who are doing heinous crimes against his creation, his will, sacrificing their own children to Baal in the most horrendous way possible, and thinking they're getting a reward. Yeah, they're getting a reward from Satan. They're getting eternal life in hell from Satan for doing this. God judges his people, and how does he do it? God himself raises up a taskmaster, Babylon, allows it to exist, and then come conquer Israel and take the people into slavery to emasculate their small boys and kill all the men and the women and the young boys and girls. They carry the brunt of the consequences of that evil going into slavery.
Yeah, they paid the price.
And they're in captivity there in Babylon. And here's Daniel, who was a young man who had been there in the land of Israel, saw the last moments of that country, that culture. And he's like a message in a bottle. Yeah. And there he is in Babylon, but he believes in God. He had some heritage, godly training that stuck with him, some inspiration from God himself. And he becomes this very important seer, this prophet, this accountant, if you will, managing, surviving, trained up in the house of Nebuchadnezzar, doing administrative duties. And he becomes recognized as someone who hears from God. And Nebuchadnezzar, when he sacked Israel and sacked the temple, he had enough respect for the God of the Israelites that he took all of the furnishings of the temple, the goblets and bowls and utensils of the temple, and had them stored away safely. There was no sacrilege to those items. They were stored away as a treasure that was captured, but they weren't defiled, right, as it were. And so David, Nebuchadnezzar goes through all sorts of horrendous incidences. He actually, because he's so full of himself at one point, and is somewhat mocking God as to who runs things, he's made to crawl around the earth like an animal and live out in the field like a wild animal for 7 years. And it's Daniel, the prophet, that proclaims the judgment on Nebuchadnezzar. But at the end of that 7 years, living like an animal, and he's still king, he's alive, so everybody honors him as king, and yet he's running around eating grass, right? Living out in the rain and cold for 7 years. Hard to imagine today. But kings can, he sounds a little bit like Biden at this point, but anyway.
Walking around mumbling.
Yeah. So he survives the 7 years, and then God restores his sanity to him. And the point of the whole story is that he realizes, even from this king position, that God reigns over the affairs of men, that God is the ultimate arbiter of who reigns and rules in every situation. Even God preserving him during that 7 years of madness, and then restoring him to power. There's so much symbology in all of that. But after he's dead and gone, and his grandson or great grandson, is still around and becomes the ruler, Belshazzar, and Daniel's old and forgotten and off in some corner of the kingdom, hidden away. They don't want him around because the stuff he says doesn't suit their soft ears. They don't like the harsh things that Daniel would say about God and judgment history. So they don't have them around. They have other advisors who say things that they want to hear the way they want to hear them. And so Belshazzar's running Babylon. Babylon is this a massive, huge city complex, 70 miles long and 15 miles wide or more, totally surrounded by walls. And down the middle of this city is a river that flows, because you got a city, you got to have water, you got to have for sanitation and everything else, got to have water. So this whole river runs right down the middle of the city. And they have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, these incredible gardens that are massive and huge, one of the 7 wonders of the world.
These were advanced civilizations. These weren't like cavemen walking around grunting.
No, what some people think when they think of that
these
time
were
period.
Mathematicians and geniuses, people that understood the engineering and architecture and just unbelievable things.
The Hanging Gardens in Babylon were on a par with the pyramid in Egypt, if you want to put it in some kind of a context. So very advanced, very sophisticated. And so this Belshazzar, he decides he's throwing a party, and he has 1,000, by legend, he has 1,000 of his, administrators of the government there, and people from other jurisdictions around Babylon, other kingdoms around Babylon. They're all in there as his guests. And so he has this huge rave, this party, this festival, this drunken bash, all the dancing girls and everything. Everybody shows up with their own entourage and their Bugattis and their Bentleys and everything else. They're all flamboyant, the best dresses. Every guy has 3 girls on each arm, to one up the competition. All of their military are involved in hosting and preparing and bringing everybody in and making sure the cars are parked in the right spot. And they've got their best dress uniforms on. The whole kingdom is focused on this huge bash. And then showing off how he's conquered all their neighbors and he's in charge. And with, remember, the Amalekites were the first people to attack the children of Israel, children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when they left slavery in Egypt and headed out across the desert to go to the promised land. This one group, this other tribe, the Amalekites, saw that they had all this treasure that was thrown on them by the Egyptians, because the Egyptians literally had to pay them to leave after all these plagues. They still didn't want to leave. They gave them all their gold and jewelry and silver, and just told them to get out, please go away, because of these judgments that had come on Egypt.
They left Egypt like the Clintons left the White House.
Yeah.
Not empty-handed. Not empty-handed.
And so the Amalekites saw all this treasure and then realized, this is just a band of hillbillies. They have no clue. They're not an army. They're totally vulnerable. So they attacked the Israelites on their flank, where the slower women and children were. They were the vulnerable as they're moving out across into the desert. So that was considered a grievous thing by God, that they attacked his people, and they were pushed back and overcome by the Israelites, and they started changing the way they operate after that. But the Amalekites had this thing against Israel all along. And so there in Babylon, the advisors who had also been conquered by Babylon, not just the Israelites, but the Amalekites, had become slaves in Babylon also. So some of those advisors have Belshazzar's ear. Hey, you know what you ought to do? Why didn't you send out, we got all this gold, all these goblets, everything from the house of God in Israel. Now, if you bring all that stuff in and you use it for the party, you'll show that you're more powerful than the God of the Israelites, and prove to everybody that you're the biggest, greatest kingdom on the earth. And so you got to do that just to show who's boss around here and who's greater, that you're like God himself. You control even the gods of these other nations, especially these haughty, uppity Jews around here. So why don't you go do that? And go, Belshazzar, he's on a drunk, he's having fun. The dancing girls are all around. His queen's there. He's got to show off. Yeah, I can't be. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do it. So he calls for the utensils, the golden utensils, the plates and bowls and cups, to be brought in from the storehouse to this drunken rave, and with all the dancing girls and everything else having a drunk, to show off amongst these 1,000 dignitaries who's boss. And so the stuff is brought in a big formal, and all the celebration is brought into the whole room. And wow, it's so beautiful. It's so much wealth and everything. We had no idea you were so powerful and, good looking, and, the wine's so good here. So they're having this big rave. And then as they're about to begin using these utensils and these instruments,
big mistake.
They were mocking God. God can't do anything around here. I'm in charge. Okay. Oh, Belshazzar, you forgot who's really in charge.
Yeah.
So Belshazzar, while he's doing this, everybody stops. Oh, what's going on? Belshazzar, what's happening? What are you all upset about? Everybody's freezing, stopping what they're doing. Turns and looks over his shoulder, and there's a cloud. And out of this cloud, this mist, a disembodied hand emerges.
Man.
And the finger of that hand starts writing in the stone walls like it's butter.
Man, I got God bumps.
Imagine, here you are, everybody's just, the flamboyance, the pageantry, all the best dresses on the girls, every hair in exactly the right place, all the right hats and headdresses, all the guys with their golden embroidery on their, military suits, and, polished, and the coolest shoes and everything else, and the music and the dancing and the bands playing on. And suddenly they all stop, and your king, hey, what's the problem? I said party, everybody party. What's going on around here?
Yeah.
What happened? And they're all pointing at the hand out of the cloud on the wall.
Wow.
Okay. No words. Dead silence, except for the grainy molecules of sand moving out of the way as this hand writes straight into the stone. And the king himself, everybody there, you got to understand how dramatic this moment is. When you've got true fear, when the adrenaline is really, really, really pumping, when you've been adrenalized, your knees literally knocked together like you're in ice cold. It can have such a traumatic effect on your physiology. And you've frozen in fear. That's a real thing. You can't even hold yourself. People literally losing continence at that moment, and that's a very real thing. Okay, so here they are, and it's the hand of God. He doesn't even trust this to an angel. Remember, God himself wrote in the tablets that he gave with his commandments to Moses up on the mount. So this was a repeat, and that story had no doubt been told many times, how God himself wrote in his own hand onto the stone tablets and gave his commandments to Moses and to his people. And so this story of the hand of God writing in stone had no doubt been told many times before and mocked by these people, especially the Amalekites, doing the will of Satan, the devil themselves, to attack God's people. And then getting Belshazzar conned into doing this evil deed, this offense against God. So there's a lot going on here. But here's the other part of the story that I think people need to think about for a second. This handwriting on the wall moment. While that event happened at a very specific point in the party, and everybody was called, the king called his advisors to come in, because this handwriting, what was written there was written in a language that they didn't understand. They couldn't interpret it. So the king has all these advisors, people brought in from lands all over the place, that know other languages, that can read other languages. All these officials, all these prophets, all these soothsayers are brought in from around the kingdom to read this. They're all present because they, it's the big party. They want to be seen too. So all the, pastors of the various religions are present. None of them can read this handwriting. Something just got written on the wall by a hand that's disembodied in space.
You're like, what does it say?
and it's just right there. Nobody's leaving the party.
Right.
They've started to sober up, and
think
nobody
the pressure
can read
on the
it.
king,
What are you
because they're
going
all
to do?
looking to their left and their right. Like who knows? I mean, all that funnels up to him. That'd be a ton of pressure.
Yeah.
Plus his fear.
Well, and then so the queen says to the king, none of your advisors can read this, but there is one advisor that isn't here today because he doesn't hang out with our crowd. And we don't have him around because we don't really like what he has to say. You never want to listen to what he says. He says things that you don't like, but maybe he might be able to read it. And by the way, he was an advisor to your dad or granddad, depending on which version of the story you've heard, Nebuchadnezzar. And he was a great advisor to him. So maybe he might have an answer. So they send for Daniel. They call him out from where he's been squirreled away. And he comes in, and the king says to him, I'll give you command as the third highest ranking person in my kingdom if you can just read what's this message that's written on the wall. Because remember, this is so traumatizing. This is so terrorizing that the king is willing to make the most powerful person in his kingdom beyond himself and his queen, the person that can read what's been written by the hand of God. And so Daniel says, King, I have zero use for any, authority that you might give to me. I don't need to be an administrator in your kingdom. Right. And you can keep your dancing girls to yourself. I'm a eunuch, so there's no value there. You can't ply me with anything. I'm not a drinker. I'm not into your drunken rave. I could care less about all of that stuff. But I am a servant of God. I am a messenger of God, and I will tell you what it says. And so everybody, you could hear a pin drop.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Nobody's moving. They're not even squirming. And Daniel looks at the words, and it's written in a language that he knows. It's written in Hebrew. And the only thing missing in the words is the vowels. Now, why is that? Why would God write a word and not include the vowels? Because vowels are movement, they're action. Vowels denote movement and action, something in play, something happening. If you add the vowels, then something's happening. But what had already occurred was unknown to everybody there. It wasn't about what was going to happen in the future. When God wrote, it had already occurred. This was a fact. This was a statement. And so Daniel added the verbs, the vowels, to make them verbs so that there was movement to understand what was said there. And it was easy for him to read with God's insight of what was going on. And he says, what it says, King, is that your kingdom is divided between the Medes and the Persians. You have been weighed in the balances. Your kingdom has been weighed, and it's wanting. You're out of balance. You're out of favor with God. And today, right now, your life is required of you. Now, the king still doesn't understand the magnitude of what he's heard. He's still in some drunken stupor, but he had proclaimed to everybody in the hearing of everybody that he would make whoever read this and could interpret it the third most powerful person in the kingdom. So he calls for the colored robes, colored that denote authority and rule, the same way we have colors in our Democrat and Republican parties, and the red and the blue, when blended, become purple, royalty, denoting some power, blended power. So Daniel's clothed in this, which he didn't want, didn't ask for, but it's done. Right. What was going on at the same time, unbeknownst to the king and everybody else present, even in that exact instant, what had been in play probably for years in advance, but not seen, not understood by anyone present there at that exact moment. This river that ran through the heart of Babylon, this incredible city, this seventh wonder of the world city, this engineering marvel, the highest technology, the most advanced city on earth at its time. This people that was used to sophisticated living with sanitation, flush toilets, right, remote control TVs, whatever you want to call it, okay? Hello, pornography available 24/7. What had happened there was that a project had been begun, unbeknownst to the king or the queen or any of the high advisors. And the Medes and the Persians had colluded to take Babylon, to take a spoil. And the way they had figured out, by some message from God, some divine insight, some inspired moment, they had figured out that if you could stop, divert the flow of the river that goes through the heart of Babylon, you didn't have to scale its high walls. You didn't have to conquer their armies. You didn't have to build a siege wall to come up against the city to get over the top of the wall or get through a gate. The gate was already there. It was hidden right there in plain sight. And it was the river. You just had to dry up the river. And so they created a pond to divert, a lake to divert the flow of the river into temporarily. Didn't have to be forever, just for a short period of time. And they created a mechanism to suddenly dam the river up, to cause an earthen works to fall into the narrow point in the river, miles and miles and miles away, completely out of sight from everyone. Mm. And they had a season that was picked to do that, even a date, because it was known far and wide that this big festival was going to occur at a particular moment in time. Their military, all of their policing people, everybody was going to be preoccupied with putting on this great, big, huge celebration on a very specific day at a very specific moment. And you didn't want to dry up the river in the morning. People would see it was going down.
Right.
And you didn't want to do it when everybody's paying close attention. All the guards are on the wall and they're really paying close attention. It had to be at a moment when everybody would be distracted and when all the officials would be caught in one place. They were all there. All the highest officials had to be in one place at that exact moment. But even the Medes and the Persians could not have planned for or anticipated the events of that night with precision. Because while they may have had some divine insight, some moment from God, some people with just the right ear, just the right place. We could take Babylon if we dammed up the river right there. Some guy out having a picnic with his girlfriend is laying on the side of a hill, enjoying life, and he gets a revelation from God. Look at that narrow point in the river. Look at those big rocks up there. If we had enough earth up there, if we could knock those rocks over at just the right time, it'd block that river. And by the way, there's a diversion pond area right there. We could even widen it out. And you only need to do that for a little while. When I was down at Babylon, where this river goes, it goes right through the city. You lower that river, you can do this. Who gave this? It's some individual.
Yeah.
Who got this unbelievably incredible insight, literally from the mind of God in a flash, in an instant. I came up with this propulsion system for vehicles, space vehicles. I had the whole thing in about under a minute. Took me 2 weeks to pen it. I literally just closed myself up in a hotel room in this obscure place on the planet for 2 weeks and looked like Howard Hughes with the hair coming out and the beard while I was writing everything
look
down.
Like Nebuchadnezzar walking around.
Yeah,
it took me 2 weeks to write down.
Nails.
It took me 2 weeks to write down everything I had, literally in under a minute, and it was just amazing how I got it. So once God's doing something like that, it's amazing. So somebody had this idea and realized how you could take Babylon. You didn't take it on its strength. You didn't even take it in a way. In fact, the river flowing through the city was the strength of that city. Its strongest points in many ways was the place where it got them.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the engineering, the rest of the work took anywhere from months to years. Total secrecy. Nobody could see it coming, except that God had it in mind. But even those that were doing all the planning could not have seen or anticipated, unless there was some divine revelation there, but I doubt it was. God likes to own certain moments as totally his own. When the hand of God came out of the cloud over the shoulder of the king and wrote his judgment on the wall, what was about to happen, even the Medes and Persians, who were already coming into the city, this huge, long, vast city built along a riverbed, they were coming in at both ends. And the people are so distracted while the river's going down, they don't even realize what's happening. It happens so fast.
Yeah.
Nobody's even looking. They're all distracted. And by the way, they're distracted by God himself, because the whole city is reverberating. A hand came out of nowhere
Right.
and it wrote in the wall like it was on butter. And everybody there is like, what the heck is just now going on? Oh my God, what's happening? The city is reverberating. The whole city moves to one side of the ship, and it's about to capsize from all the weight being on one side of the ship at the exact same moment. And they don't even realize, while they're looking up at this celebration that's been stopped, looking past the Lamborghinis and the Bugattis and the Ferraris parked out front that were mesmerizing everybody, the beautiful chariots and horsemen, that right below their feet, right beside them, an army is invading at that very second, taking every outpost, cutting off the communications, seizing segments and sections of the city. Remember, when they came in there, they took Babylon whole. Everybody was captured. They had a plan. They'd been there. They'd seen the city. They knew the layout. It wasn't done haphazard, but they themselves, the conquering army, could not have even known that God himself was also simultaneously intervening. They couldn't have anticipated the handwriting on the wall when the verbs, when the vowels weren't included to make those words verbs. It was because from God's mind, God's perspective at that very instant, it was no longer a plan in action. It was a fait accompli. It had already occurred. It was done. The
What a
handwriting
great
on the wall was the
story.
last thing.
Wow.
And I mean, everyone's heard that phrase, the handwriting on the wall.
Yep. And what's interesting about that too is that their pride and arrogance is what really brought them down.
A lot of those quotes could have been taken from Jerry Nadler. I don't know if you saw that quote going around recently of the young congressman, reading, presentation, and talk about the arrogance of our government and defiance of God.
Whenever a nation's laws no longer reflect the standards of God, that nation is in rebellion against him and will inevitably bear the consequences. And I think we are seeing the consequences of rejecting God here in our country today. And this bill speaks directly against what is laid out in Scripture. Our government, through this bill, is going to redefine what a woman is and what a man is.
Mr. Stubbe, what any religious tradition ascribes as God's will is no concern of this Congress.
It's like, whoa.
And I'm like, oh, man.
Pride and arrogance. That's what will bring him down.
Well, God will not be mocked.
Nope.
God is not mocked. The lesson from Belshazzar, the lesson from Nebuchadnezzar, the lesson to Babylon itself and those that would live and function in Babylon is that God decides within the affairs of men. God appoints men from either station, any station, to be in control, to take certain actions. There's this divine hand that we see through life over and over again. I was just talking with a great guy a few minutes ago, and who's been in some pretty cool, neat, unusual places throughout his life, like me. And he said, God radically assigns the players on your dance card. And what the reference there is, you would, back in the day, you'd go to these dances, a USO dance or a private party dance or something, and the host would oftentimes engineer who got to dance with who and try to set up people so that you could meet different people and have fun, either for business or pleasure, potential mates, etc. So the host would have
You're so romantic,
fun.
a potential mate.
Permanent or short term, whatever.
Yeah.
But that dance card was the next dance that you would be doing, and so you'd draw the dance card, and then you'd go off and dance with that person, and that was what made it fun. You got to meet people and have fun at the square dance. Okay. And that's part of the fun. Even in the square dances, you get a chance actually to dance with everybody, because you get passed around and you meet. And how do people even get a chance to court in society, in the world the way it is today? It's very hard for young people, single people, to get a chance to even have a decent courting situation, because those kinds of environments don't fully exist. I really feel for kids in that regard. It's
convoluted the rules of engagement so much now.
Yeah.
We're going to have our 28th anniversary this week coming up. Pretty excited. But I look around at people dating now. I'm like, man, I would want her to sign a release before I held her hand. Could you sign this, please? May I hold your hand? In the world today, it's gotten so odd and weird.
It's crazy.
Do I get the door for her? Can I want to honor her? If I get the door for her, she'll think I'm a chauvinist. It's like,
that's right.
Oh, I wouldn't.
No, not at all.
I wouldn't know whether to scratch my watch or wind my butt.
Yeah.
So, I have a question for you. As you were talking, as we are waiting.
Oh, I wanted to make sure you finish the dance card.
Sorry.
Story. I kind of jumped in there. I get so engaged in your stories.
Well, the thing about the dance card is what I was going to say is that what we were talking about, there's been so many things that I've had experiences in my life, even just recently, where you couldn't anticipate or engineer the moment. It's literally a hand of God thing. I mentioned the other day we had that thing out in Vegas, and I had talked about near-death experiences, and last year around this time, and done a broadcast on it, that this election season be like a near-death experience. So as I learned later, Sean Stone had asked, and I think Nino Rodriguez is in on it, had asked Daniel Brinkley, since he's had near-death experiences because he was struck by lightning, and has been with people at the time of passing, and that's really been his ministry for quite a long time. They'd asked him to come on their show, or a show they were going to do together, and talk about America in this moment, as though, comparing it to a near-death experience. And then they had forwarded to Daniel the show that I did, a year ago, as just kind of a reference for that. And so long and short of it is, when they were doing this, they sent this to Daniel. So Daniel listens to this thing overnight, and it's like 4 or 5 in the morning when he finishes listening to that presentation I did, which is like an hour and a half long. And he says, and he says that God told him that he had to get a message to Juan based on that presentation. And so he says, God, I don't even know who this Juan guy is, and I wouldn't have a clue how to reach him. So if it's going to happen, you're going to have to, figure that out and make that happen. Well, as fate would have it, about 2.5, 3 hours later, I was pulling up at the South Point Casino, where we had shown The Sound of Freedom and the makings of a perfect day. And I was dropping something off, or picking something up, because of course we had a lot of guests in there. And so I pull up in one of my Corvettes. I had a red vet, one of my red vets there. So I pull up, it's like a neon light. It's pretty hard to not be seen when you pull up there. And I pull up, I run inside for a minute, I come back out, 5 minutes later, and there off to the side of the area, just getting dropped off, I believe, I see Daniel Brinkley. And I said, Daniel, what are you doing? Well, shoot, we hadn't seen each other in person 15 years. And we'd only talked, I think, probably 5 years earlier on something. And, so we talked for a minute or two, and he'd done work for me, in another role decades ago. So
small world.
Yeah.
So we talked for a minute or two. I says, look, I'm right in the thick of it right now. I've got to run. We're having a private get together tonight. Let me shoot you the address. Why don't you come on over? He says, well, I got this appointment, that, and so is in town, another friend of ours. And I says, I don't care. Bring him too. Come on, you got to be there. And so he says, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And so let me see what I can do. So that night he shows up at this private get together, and we're talking. I'm talking in the room because I had something else doing business wise that I was trying to complete related to the Sound of Freedom movie. And I hadn't really gotten a chance to talk with Daniel, and Daniel's off the side, and all of a sudden he realizes, oh my gosh, well, he knows me. I did interviews for quite a while under W, and we knew each other from a lot earlier than that. And it just clicked in his mind as he's listening, and he realizes, oh my gosh, that's Juan 07. And he has this aha moment, and he has to have another drink. He's so shocked.
It's like, oh, that's my guy. That's what I was looking for.
And I had some pretty good scotch there. The host had some pretty good scotch there, so he had one more than he should have. And he's all like, oh my gosh, he didn't realize, because that's who he had to give a message to.
Wow. God appointment right there.
Right. And so what was funny was when Jim Caviezel and I had talked, here's this guy struck by lightning when he was filming The Passion of the Christ. He's struck by lightning on the cross during thing, has his heart blown apart, has to have a couple operations. He's had these near-death experiences. And when he and I first talked, he says, I got to tell you something. I got a message from God. I got to tell you something. Okay. So I have Jim Caviezel with a message from God for me. And then I have Daniel Brinkley with a message from God for me, both at the same party. It's hard enough to find one guy that's been struck by lightning and then has a message from God for you. But to get two guys in the same room at the same party, now that's a divine appointment, right?
That is divine. And God really had a message for you.
That won't happen often.
No,
well,
and
then and then Daniel, because he'd had, maybe a little more than he should have. I says, you can't drive. My host says, can you do something about that? I says, yeah, I'll right. So I drive him home in his car. Well, that gave us the hour that we needed for him to get a chance to tell me what he wanted to share with me, what he felt he had a message from God to share with me. And that all of that circumstance came about in the same day. But you couldn't have even planned it. You know how busy I was and how I had really no extra time for anything in that window. And yet God engineered it that exactly in that very tiny window of a couple minutes, he was in exactly the place where I stood out for just a moment. And then we crossed eyes and crossed paths to set it up so we could have the meeting later in the day. And literally within 24 hours of him saying, okay, God, how am I going to reach this guy? And God engineers it in a way that he couldn't even have planned.
That is unbelievable.
And these are these divine appointments. God radically assigning the players on the dance card who gets to dance together, and how these events that turn big doors turn on tiny hinges. Those people that think that the situation we're in as a country right now is out of control, that events have spun off in some bizarre, unusual way, and we can never get this back. America's lost forever. The only thing I would tell you, remind you, is that a handwriting on the wall moment is coming. It's not far off. The affairs of men are not unseen by God. I would even tell you that in my mind, as I see it, when all those people showed up on January 6th, after President Trump called them and asked them to come and be counted and make their, presence known in the earth, in the country. And they came and were representative by proxy of the rest of the nation who couldn't be here physically, but needed to be counted. Those people that came here and walked the streets in DC and walked to the Capitol, they were here in prayer.
Yes.
They were here singing a song. They were singing church songs.
It was a time of worship for sure. Yeah, we were both there. There was a time of unity. There was Asians for Trump and every different kind of organization praying over our country, interceding.
This was, and I said it in one of the other presentations I did. This was like the expensive ointment that the alabaster jar that was broken, and Christ was anointed with oil in preparation for burial, so that his skin would not rot, his body would not rot. Even though he died on the cross, he was anointed before all of those events happened in that feast moment, just before he was taken into captivity and then slain and hung on a cross and slain. But his body was anointed for burial. If we're looking at this as a near-death experience as a nation, what's going on right now, that moment just before the events of January 20th and the subsequent events, that January 6th event was God's people being present, being counted. This anointing moment in preparation for this hellish near-death experience, burial of the country that we're experiencing now. And the only other thing that I would add is that when you have a near-death experience, a number of people have recounted this, and one of them sticks out in my mind. And this person was one of the SEAL team's members, and he had fallen into hell. And it was this horrendous experience, the things he recounted, everything that he saw. And he noticed at a particular point that there was still this silvery thread that connected to him like an umbilical cord, even down into the depths of hell in this horrid experience. And he somehow, as he reached this location, this depth, realized that if that cord, when it was finally cut, that was his last connection to reality, this world, and he would remain in hell forever. That was the final thing, even in the depths of hell. And so this connection, this silvery thread, it was to him like a type of faith. And he cried out to God for salvation, to save him, to not let him go. And many people have recounted something similar. I remember one particular girl, she said, in this hellish experience, in this near-death experience, she said, and she cried out. She remembered only from a Sunday school where she'd been, a friend had invited her to Sunday school for a week of vacation Bible school as a young girl. And it was the only real experience she'd ever had in a church type of a thing. She grew up in a non-church house, and she wasn't a horrible person, but she was a drug user and it had a death, overdose. And so she said, she looked up and she cried out to God, please save me, Jesus, please save me. In this last instant before she knew she would never, ever leave this place. It was just a horror beyond horrors. And she saw the tiniest little flicker of light, like a star in the sky. And then she was fixated on that. And in the middle of this smoke and horror and stench, a smell so bad she couldn't, made you want to retch every moment. And the light got bigger, and then it got bigger, and then it got bigger. And then all of a sudden racing towards her. And she said she knew that it was Michael, the archangel. She just somehow knew that. And he was exactly 9 feet tall, something similar. A number of people have said similar things. And there he was right in front of her. And he grabbed onto her and fought the angels off, these demons off that had her in their grip, and then escorted her out of hell. And but this silvery thread of faith, while it might look like a star in the heaven, you don't realize that was actually that lifeline, that last moment that she was gripping onto, and that was her connection to eternity, heaven or hell. And so in this moment, the question for America is it all over? Is there even a glimmer of faith? We look to all these people that are butthurt because the President Trump, when he still could, didn't do any of the things he could have done to stop this, to save us, to do whatever. And my only response to that would be, you're on the other side of the firewall. There's certain things in play that no one could know, because in gaming this out, all of those avenues that could have been done legally could have been pursued other ways. All those things that could have been pursued other ways were non-starters. They wouldn't win in the end. We've seen how the Supreme Court is. It's a captured operation in America.
It is.
There's a reason why President Trump, on good, sound advice by true patriot Americans, doing everything they knew to do sincerely with their best faith efforts, were not acted on, because at some other level they knew that the president knew that even though they were great in a correct world, things operating the way they're supposed to, had a reasonable expectation of winning, should have won the day. In a captured operation, there was no way that you were going to get to justice through the Justice Department. There was no way that you were going to get to the right answer with a Congress that was a captured operation. doing the bidding of foreign entities. So there was a reason why, even though it was good advice, it was sound advice, it was reasonable advice, it was from true patriots, that the president couldn't act and he couldn't convey to them. Why? Because almost nobody gets to be in on that for security, for protection. So while it may appear a certain way and it may not make sense for the time being, God rules in the affairs of men. There's a lot in play, and there's a lot of dangers in the financial markets, dangers in the human slavery captivity area, that there's decisions, there's things in play that unfortunately you're not dialed in on. And people have made very heavy, weighty, difficult decisions with everything in the world at play, at stake. You're looking at Casino Royale with not just America, but the whole world in the balance. And when you're in a Casino Royale type of a game, you don't cash out at any point until there is a winner of everything that was put into play. You come, you put your chips on the table, you play each hand, but at the end of the day, you're leaving with everything or nothing. And that's the game that's being played right now by the people that are at the table. And this game, the last cards in this game of Casino Royale have not yet been played. It's not over yet. What the date is, what the exact timing is of the last flip of the cards on the table, I can't tell you, and neither can anybody else, because God himself, just like in the handwriting on the wall moment, I can tell you that stuff is in play. It's moving. It's happening right now. It has been happening. The planning, the work, everything that has been done, has been being done, has been in play for a very long time. But this last instant, even the Medes and the Persians could not have anticipated a move of God, an act of God, the handwriting moment on the wall by God himself in that judgment moment. And it didn't even happen as it was happening, truly. That's why there was no vowels, there was no verb to it. It had already, from God's perspective, it was a done deal. And that's when the handwriting shows up. We have to keep that silvery thread of faith in play. If America's people are not praying, if you don't know to pray, if you don't understand, look, there's 1,000 things that can still go wrong. If you know 25 of them, you're a genius. Faith, prayer, don't give up. Don't get butthurt that it didn't happen your way. Understand that the people that are making these decisions have so many more things and angles in play and at stake. And they have decisions that have to be made with so much more than you can possibly imagine on the line, moving parts. And even then, they know that God himself is the ultimate arbiter. You make your best laid plans, you do all of your projections, you check it with computers and everything else. But in the end, a hand of God moment can be the difference and distract the enemy exactly as needed to get you to a complete, total, perfect victory, as opposed to a combat that, even if you win, can be ultimately more destructive even to your own forces. They took Babylon because the Babylonians were also fully distracted at the exact instant that was needed to complete the victory perfectly.
You know, and that's our job, to maintain and steward our own individual self. It's easy to look out the window and say, man, this is what everybody should be doing. You know, what I need to be doing is to keep my mind right. Be careful what I listen to.
Be praying and declaring.
How much hopelessness do I hang on to? Which hopeless friends Do I need to maybe limit some of their input into my world? One thing we've tried to be very conscious of is there are many voices, not one, not two, not three, many that are declaring God said this was going to play out a certain way, and they've not blinked or changed their mind. We listened regularly to Kat Kerr. We listen regularly to
Johnny and
Elizabeth Enlow. Listen regularly to Robin Bullock.
Yep.
We listen regularly to Hank Kuhneman. You know, and
Steve Schultz at the Elijah list and Elijah streaming.
This cowboy named Juan Savin. We surround ourselves, and you have to protect that. Like, I wouldn't let somebody with dog poop on their shoe come walk into my home and wipe their feet. You have to protect your space around you and not partner with hopelessness, because I can promise you, God has not given up on this country. We're not abandoned. We're not forgotten.
He's not chewing his nails.
He didn't fall off his throne.
No,
he's not frazzled. He's not, oh, I didn't see this coming. I didn't know. And that is where our hope lies, not in an individual, not in any one specific person, but in this plan that's working around us that has been foretold. And we are living in the moment where prophecy is being played out. We're living in the most incredible moment in time. I wouldn't want
best time to be alive.
I wouldn't want to live at any other intersection throughout human history than right now. This is the most exciting time. This is the time that's going to be written about. We're going to be legendary in the future for being able to tell the stories of how this unfolds. And I believe that. I believe that, like I believe the sun's coming up tomorrow. I don't, and I can't even put a finger on exactly why I believe it, other than I've protected myself from hopelessness.
So good. So good. So Juan, thank you
so much. That
silvery
thread is the hope. The silvery thread is the hope. Don't lose that silvery thread. Don't get lost in despair. Don't give up faith.
Yes.
Not in men, not in machines, not in military, not in politicians, not in money, but God himself. Whatever the plan is, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. We are in a near-death experience moment. It's not death experience.
Yes.
Because we'd never get back, but we are seeing what life under these demons, we're tasting and smelling, feeling the grip of their claws on our shoulders, on our being. Don't get lost in that. That silvery thread of faith, that's what you have to hang on to. Don't get lost in it. And the near-death experience is a gift from God to understand what would be if we did not have him to reach out to call on if he wasn't there. America's only hope is God in heaven. Even with the best laid plans, even with the best guys, if you're not dialing in a God component to the victory here, it's no victory at all.
Wow. That is powerful.
That's a drop the mic moment.
Thank you so much, Juan. Again, we just really appreciate your time. We value that.
We value your friendship.
We do. And I
thank you for being a regular part of Flyover Conservatives.
Yeah, I know our listeners do too. They love you and just really appreciate you so much. It's fun to look at the comments because there are so many great things that people say. And the number one thing I see is people say, I have hope. When I hear that, I have hope. And that's critical.
That's important. Is so much to be hopeful for, but you got to protect your ears because a lot of people don't want you to hear it.
That's true.
Juan, thank you for being a voice of hope. Thank you. Thank you for protecting your mind. You know, you're a valuable resource in this country. Thank you for protecting yourself so you don't get, lost in the sauce and swayed out in the weeds. So
true.
Stacey, want to bring us in?
I will. So thank you all so much for listening today. And we just speak blessing over you that the future is brighter than the past. We just bless you to wake up, speak up, and show up. Have a great day, and we'll see you here next time. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Flyover Conservatives podcast with David and Stacey Whited. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and leave us a comment below. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's podcast, share with those who came to mind. Be blessed and make it a great day.